On Tuesday, January 16, 2024, at 9 a.m., three men pulled into a quiet storage facility in Widnes, Cheshire. They were there to pick up a shipment that had journeyed thousands of miles across the Atlantic. But within minutes, undercover officers observing from a distance would make their move, revealing something far more sinister than just routine cargo. Fast forward to Wednesday, September 10th, 2025. Inside the Chelmsford Crown Court, a group of men stood silently as the judge delivered their sentences. What had started as a bold sailing adventure had spiraled into one of Britain's most ambitious narcotics trafficking investigations. And, in a completely different scene, inside a small cafe in Kent, three older men huddled over their cups of tea, whispering about a delivery they believed would make them wealthy. Their fatal mistake was not knowing that every single word was being recorded, and in a matter of days, their entire plan would unravel on a roadside, hundreds of miles from there. 3 moments, 3 separate operations, each one exposing how the most ordinary settings can conceal extraordinary crimes. This is the story of 3 major organized smuggling rings, and how their own precision, greed, and overconfidence ultimately led to their downfall. Welcome to Burning Crimes. Let's dive right into the case. Wei Ji Chen, a 29-year-old, lived a quiet life in a modest row house on Birchfield Road in Liverpool. To his neighbors, he was just a polite guy, unassuming, the kind of person who kept to himself. But behind that calm facade, Chen was orchestrating one of the most meticulously structured cannabis import networks to be uncovered in Cheshire in recent memory. He was the mastermind of the operation, a man who approached smuggling with the cold logic of a business plan, testing every single variable before taking a real risk. Long before the massive import that would ultimately be his undoing, Chen had spent months experimenting with smaller shipments through the mail. Packages from Canada were sent through standard shipping carriers, hidden inside legitimate merchandise. These were trial runs, designed to probe which ports, which companies, and which customs inspections could be dodged. These smaller loads were never big enough to raise red flags, but they provided him with crucial data: which shipping labels were effective, how long deliveries took, and which routes were least likely to arouse suspicion. Once he felt confident in his system, Chen decided to scale up. He rented a unit at the storage team facility on Townhouse Lane in Widnes, using a name with no public connection to him. The rental was registered under a clean business name, listed for nothing more than basic storage, nothing out of the ordinary. From this innocuous base, Chen coordinated every single stage of the operation: freight paperwork, shipping schedules, and the final distribution. When a shipment landed, all his communications were funneled through encrypted phones, devices that were later traced back to his suppliers in Canada and to distributors all across Merseyside. Among his most trusted partners were John and Luke Kinsella, a pair of brothers from Liverpool. John, age 34, from St. Julian Drive, was already on law enforcement's radar as a regular customer for Chen's smaller test shipments. For John, this new, larger shipment promised a massive payday, with hundreds of kilos ready to be moved throughout Merseyside. His brother Luke, just 23, had no permanent address and at the time no criminal record. His role was straightforward: move the product, unload it upon arrival, and manage the storage. His payment wasn't in cash, but in a cut of the cannabis that he could sell on his own. When investigators later pieced together the text messages, the shipping routes, and the surveillance footage, it became crystal clear that both brothers knew exactly what they were involved in. They weren't just low-level couriers caught in the middle. On the contrary, they were active partners in a multi-million-pound import scheme, each playing a crucial role in a system designed to appear legitimate right up until the very end. This conspiracy operated quietly in the shadows for months, running from September of 2023 all the way to January 16, 2024. Wei Ji-chen had honed his network into a slick, almost corporate-level supply chain. His product was high-grade cannabis, sourced internationally, Wei Ji-chen, and moved through legitimate freight channels from Canada. It was hidden inside shipping containers, filled with ordinary household furniture. The kind of cargo that wouldn't draw a second glance on a shipping manifest or a customs screen. But beneath all the clean paperwork, small inconsistencies were beginning to emerge. Eventually, customs intelligence analysts flagged a recurring importer's name, linked to shipments that were unusually heavy for domestic furniture, while at the same time, local officers with the Cheshire Police began noticing suspicious patterns of vehicle activity around specific industrial units. By early January 2024, detectives were convinced they had uncovered an organized smuggling ring, and a joint surveillance operation was officially authorized. Unmarked cars monitored vehicle movements between Liverpool, Widnes, and Runcorn, while phone data analysts began tracking the encrypted communications that were later proven to belong to Chen and his associates. By the second week of January, the pieces were falling into place. Intelligence suggested a new, larger container was on its way from Canada, scheduled to arrive through the port of Liverpool. What no one outside the investigation knew at the time was that this particular shipment would be the one to blow the entire network wide open. On the morning of January 15, 2024, a bright orange shipping container was rolled off a cargo vessel that had just docked at the port of Liverpool. It had traveled the same route as before, supposedly carrying 8 bed frames with matching mattresses. The paperwork was all in order, and on the surface, there was nothing to suggest anything was out of the ordinary. Once it was cleared by port handlers, the container was loaded onto a semi-truck and hauled inland to the storage team warehouse. To any casual observer, it looked just like a standard furniture delivery, one of hundreds that passed through the industrial park each week. But when officers later sliced open those mattresses, they would find something else entirely. At 9 a.m., the quiet morning routine of the Widnes Industrial Park was shattered by the arrival of several vehicles at the storage warehouse. Surveillance cameras, strategically positioned by Cheshire Police weeks in advance, captured every single moment. One car in particular stood out. A black Audi A3 registered to John Kinsler. Inside were John, his younger brother Luke, and the operations organizer Wei Ji-chen. They drove in through the yard's gates and parked right alongside the newly delivered orange container and began to work with a quiet urgency, completely unaware that the entire scene was being streamed live to a command post nearby. The trio started prying open the container's rear doors. The footage showed them examining the wrapped mattresses, shifting them one by one from the truck bed to the storage area. For them, it was a practiced routine, careful, deliberate, and familiar, but for the officers watching from a distance, this was the exact moment they had been waiting for. The takedown was planned down to the second, set to trigger as soon as the men started handling the suspected load. A prearranged tactical signal was given. Within moments, armed officers from the Cheshire Constabulary's Serious and Organized Crime Unit swarmed the site. Plainclothes surveillance teams moved in from both ends of the yard, while marked police units blocked off every exit. Shouts echoed across the yard as the men were ordered to get on the ground. A brief struggle ensued, but the scene was brought under control within seconds. All 3 suspects, Chen, John, and Luke Kansela, were detained on site. Officers immediately began a systematic search of the container and the surrounding warehouse unit. Inside, they found the mattresses, still sealed and neatly stacked. Several were cut open under direct police supervision, revealing the first of the vacuum-sealed parcels of cannabis concealed within. The true scale of the operation immediately became crystal clear. Officers counted 668 vacuum-sealed packages, a total of 334 kilograms of cannabis. Forensic teams worked methodically throughout the day, documenting serial markings on the packages. Investigators also recovered shipping manifests and storage agreements, all tied to the fake identity he had used to rent the storage space. The forged lease became a key piece of evidence, proving his control over the very property where the illicit substances were discovered. During a search of the suspect's vehicles, detectives found multiple cell phones, including encrypted handsets that were later analyzed by the Cheshire Police's Digital Forensics Unit. Data extraction uncovered a chain of group messages arranging meeting times, vehicle logistics, and payments, with the terminology used leaving no doubt about their illegal enterprise, mirrored those in earlier intercepted communications, with coded references to frames and foam that were consistent with their concealment method. Specialist analysts also uncovered evidence of EncroChat-style encryption software, confirming that Chen and his associates were using systems specifically designed to prevent interception. While reports hadn't revealed any names, the operational structure was nearly identical. These findings connected Chen's communication methods to patterns observed in wider organized crime operations across the Northwest. At Liverpool Crown Court, prosecutor Olivia Christinecci Travis described the case as an industrial-scale importation operation disguised as domestic freight. By the fall of 2024, the investigation that began with months of surveillance and a single container had finally reached its conclusion in court. On October 8, 2024, Wei Ji Chen, John Consala, and Luke Consala appeared before the Liverpool Crown Court facing charges of conspiracy to import and distribute Class B narcotics. The evidence against them was overwhelming, much of which we have already detailed. One by one, each man entered a guilty plea, acknowledging their part in the operation that had smuggled more than 300 kilograms of cannabis into the country. When sentencing was handed down, Wei Ji Chen received 7 years in prison. John Consala was given 6 years and 6 months, while Luke Consala was sentenced to 4 years. In total, the trio faced a combined 17.5 years behind bars. For investigators, this case was more than just another drug conviction, but while Chen's operation ended in a storage yard in Wydens, another network, hundreds of miles away, was already plotting something far bolder and much more ambitious. This second investigation led police deep into the heart of Essex and into a sophisticated criminal network, whose plans spanned entire oceans. Uncovered under Operation Venetic, this case was one of the most complex probes into organized drug trafficking ever coordinated by the UK's Organised Crime Partnership, a joint task force of the National Crime Agency and the Metropolitan Police Service. At its centre was Lee McClenahan, age 57, of Chelmsford, known on the encrypted EncroChat network as Cat with 9 Lives. Investigators would later describe him as the driving force, the master strategist behind every major shipment. His right-hand man, Leah Tolbert, age 55, of Chadwell St. Mary, used the alias Legitimate Yak. Together, they built a logistics network capable of moving tons of product across continents, disguised behind what appeared to be legitimate trade routes. But McClenahan and Tolbert were far from working alone. The group's structure mirrored a corporate hierarchy, with specialists assigned to sourcing, transportation, finance, and cover-up operations. Among the trusted associates who made up the wider network were several men who each played a crucial, yet specialized role in keeping the operation running. Daniel Brethwaite, aged 61, and from Westcliff-on-Sea, acted as the group's financial coordinator, handling pricing, payments, and the flow of money between suppliers and distributors. Ian McGee, aged 68, from Chelmsford, brought his years of sailing experience to the organization. We will get back to him in a few minutes. The financial side of the conspiracy was further bolstered by John Campbell, age 69, of London, who acted as a fixer. He created fraudulent payments and front companies to disguise transactions and to help secure the release of shipments when they arrived in Europe. Working abroad, Carl Richter, age 52, from Swansea, served as a vital link to contacts in South Africa, where one of the group's major cannabis consignments originated. He coordinated closely with Kane Ward, age 60, from Upminster, who handled domestic arrangements once the imported substances reached British soil. Ward was responsible for storage, logistics, and ensuring the safe distribution of the loads once they cleared customs. Furthermore, the organization relied on legitimate-looking businesses to hide its movements. Poltoza, age 61, from Epping, ran a textile company which served as the drop-off point for a 400-kilo shipment of cannabis. Stephen Persaud, a 41-year-old from Upminster, operated a freight forwarding business that handled incoming cargo across several ports. At the same time, Sandeep Gruel, 37 and from Grays, leveraged his food business in Tilbury to add another layer of legitimacy, making illegal shipments look like routine commercial imports. Together, these men were the operational backbone of McLennan and Tolbert's network, a structure that blended maritime expertise, business credibility, and financial sleight of hand to conceal the true scale of their global drug trafficking enterprise. But it was a structure that would soon crumble under the weight of its own ambition. The plan was as audacious as it was intricate. A 600-kilogram shipment of cocaine, concealed on a yacht, competing in a transatlantic race. Lee McClenahan devised a scheme that merged the excitement of a legitimate sporting event with the calculated precision of organized smuggling. His concept involved entering a vessel in an annual transatlantic sailing race, which ran from St. Lucia, in the Caribbean, to Lagos, Portugal, without being detected. To pull this off, McLennan needed experience and trust. He recruited Ian Margie, a 68-year-old professional sailor. Back in 2019, Margie had sailed a yacht named Ocean Magic in that very same race. Investigators would later label this a dummy run, a trial voyage to test the conditions, routes, and timing, all without carrying any contraband. This reconnaissance gave McClenahan the intel he needed, exactly how long the crossing would take, which ports were likely to inspect vessels, and where they could make contact off the grid. By early 2020, preparations for the actual operation were in full swing. Margie and another sailor bought a second vessel, the Satirius, which was slated to transport 1/2 ton of cocaine from South America to Europe. Meanwhile, McLennan sent his trusted associate, Leah Tolbert, to Venezuela to meet with cartel representatives and lock down the logistics. The plan was to load the cocaine before the yacht set sail, then cross the Atlantic under the guise of a legitimate race competitor, a tactic that investigators would later call a textbook example of criminal innovation. For nearly 2 years, they fine-tuned every single detail. They charted routes, debated drop-off locations, and synchronized their schedules. If they had succeeded, the smuggling run could have netted them tens of millions in profit. But by May of 2020, the plan fell apart, and not because of law enforcement, but because the COVID-19 pandemic forced the organizers to cancel the entire race. With his transatlantic route shut down, McClenahan had to pivot. He started looking into new methods for moving multi-ton quantities of cocaine out of South America, this time concealed inside shipping containers packed with fruits and vegetables. And we'll get to that in just a few minutes. The race that never was had spared the group one disaster, but their next venture would be pushing their luck even further. They believed they were untouchable, hiding behind encrypted phones and digital aliases. Their conversations were designed to disappear with every message sent. But in June of 2020, that illusion was shattered by the EncroChat breach. I won't get into all the details, since you've likely heard many of those stories before. But with that decrypted data, the true scale of the Essex network began to come into focus. The online handles were traced directly back to Lee McClenahan and Leah Tolbert, who had been using the platform to discuss the very operational details we've just covered. Operation Venetic, spearheaded by the organized crime partnership, moved in swiftly. Financial investigators tracked payments made for one of the yachts, including a payment of £100,000 linked to Ian Margie, the group's designated sailor. On other devices seized during their arrests, officers found photos of Leah Tolbert meeting with Venezuelan cartel representatives and sailing crew members in the Caribbean, images that turned digital chatter into concrete evidence. Detective Inspector Richard Smith of the Organized Crime Partnership called it one of the most sophisticated smuggling plots they had ever dismantled. EncroChat evidence revealed that when the transatlantic yacht scheme fell apart, Lee McClenaghan was far from finished. He simply pivoted. By late 2021, his focus had shifted from cocaine on the high seas to industrial-scale cannabis shipments, with the loads concealed within legitimate commercial freight. In March of 2022, a new shipment docked at Tilbury Port in Essex, and on paper, it appeared to be just routine cargo. It was a wooden crate, declared as a machine lathe imported from South Africa. Everything seemed to be in order. The paperwork matched perfectly. The manifest listed the exporter as an engineering supplier, with the delivery address set for a textile business in Epping, a company owned by Paul Tozer. But when Border Force officers conducted a targeted inspection, they discovered something completely different, hidden inside the machinery's casing. Inside, officers uncovered hundreds of tightly wrapped, vacuum-sealed packages. By the time the search concluded, the haul totaled 408 kilograms of cannabis, making it one of the largest seizures on record at Tilbury that year. The operation was directly tied to Lee McClenaghan, Daniel Breathwaite, and Paul Tozer. Subsequent analysis of communication records revealed discussions about timing, logistics, and the expected value of the incoming load conversations that perfectly matched the timeline of the seized container. But this time, the product never reached its destination. The entire consignment was intercepted before it could ever be collected. Thanks to intelligence shared between the Border Force and the Organized Crime Partnership, or OCP, officers were able to track the shipment's entire route, confirm its origin, and gather forensic evidence that linked it directly to McClenaghan's network. However, they didn't move in for arrests just yet. Instead of immediately charging the suspects, investigators kept the Tilbury seizure and all related intelligence under wraps, a deliberate strategy designed to avoid tipping off the larger network. Officers continued their quiet surveillance, connecting the dots between phone logs, shipping records, and company paperwork. The goal was to map the entire supply chain, not just to disrupt a single shipment. To anyone outside the investigation, the cargo simply seemed lost or held up by paperwork. Meanwhile, the conspirators carried on with their business, believing their routes were still secure and that the operation remained profitable. The network simply pushed forward, switching up its routes and suppliers, and it wasn't long before they attempted another import, this time originating from Vancouver. By mid-2023, the network had adapted once more, but their methods remained the same. They used legitimate shipping routes, clean paperwork, and front businesses, all designed to make every container look completely ordinary. In July of 2023, a container arrived at Southampton Port. Its manifest declared it was holding 20 industrial tower toolboxes. The documentation listed a legitimate supplier, and upon casual inspection, the shipment appeared to be completely routine. Yet, experience had taught Border Force officers exactly where to look during a more detailed search. They drilled into the base of one of the metal toolboxes and discovered more tightly wrapped packages. Within a few hours, the final count reached 268 kilograms of cannabis, all of it vacuum-sealed and packed inside the hidden compartments of every single unit. The investigation would later reveal that this operation was organized by Leah Talbot. He had coordinated the shipment with Stephen Persaud and Sundip Gruel, who in turn provided the delivery address to conceal the cargo's true contents. And, of course, Paul Tozer and John Campbell were also involved, using the same methods as in previous operations. When investigators compared this seizure with the earlier interception at Tilbury, the sheer scale of the operation became undeniable. Between the two cannabis imports from South Africa and Vancouver, the total haul reached 676 kilograms, providing clear evidence of a network operating at an industrial capacity and willing to exploit global supply routes for immense profit. Within just a few weeks of the Southampton interception, the operation shifted from surveillance to enforcement. A series of coordinated raids were carried out across Essex, Kent, and South Wales, targeting every key member of the criminal network. McClenaghan, Talbot, and their associates were taken into custody under the supervision of the Organised Crime Partnership, the OCP, bringing an end to more than 4 years of intensive investigation. Court proceedings took place at Chelmsford Crown Court throughout 2024, where each defendant would face justice. They faced charges tailored to their specific roles within the organization, and when sentences were handed down in October of 2024, the punishment truly fit the crime. 57-year-old Lee McClenaghan was given a 30-year prison sentence. Leah Talbot, age 55, received 23 years, while Daniel Breathwaite, 61, was sentenced to 22 years. 68-year-old Ian Meji was jailed for 20 years, and others received their own penalties. John Campbell, 69, was given 10 years, while 60-year-old Kane Ward was sentenced to 6 years and 6 months. Meanwhile, Carl Richter, 52, received 11 years after his conviction on October 16, 2024, and Sandeep Grewal, 37, was given 40 months. Stephen Persaud, 41, got 32 months, and Paul Tozer, 61, was handed a 6-year prison sentence. In total, the group received more than 111 years behind bars, a sentence that completely dismantled the network once described as one of the most organized under Operation Venetic. It was a warm July morning in 2020 when 3 men met at a small cafe on the edge of Kent. To any bystander on the street, they appeared to be old friends, just relaxing and laughing over breakfast, but hidden microphones were telling a very different story. Inside the cafe, every word was being captured by covert listening devices planted by the National Crime Agency, acting on intelligence, or maybe a tip from an informant. The voices recorded belonged to Mark Ewell, age 64, Alfred Rumbold, 65, and Brian Wright, 73, all of them veterans of the freight and moving industry. Wright was the owner of P&D Removals, a long-standing transport company founded in Kent back in 1972. Ewell and Rumbold were both seasoned haulers, men who knew the ins and outs of shipping routes and customs paperwork, and how to transport goods across borders without attracting unwanted attention. This recording would later become a crucial piece of evidence in the case. Over coffee and sandwiches, the 3 men spoke in guarded tones about border inspections and vehicle schedules, and the kind of profits they could make if everything went according to plan. One of them even boasted they were about to hit the jackpot, a phrase that would later echo through the courtrooms. Investigators listening in from a distance were already aware they were dealing with more than just routine smuggling. Intelligence indicated the trio was connected to a Merseyside-based organized crime group known for importing cocaine on a massive scale. The cafe meeting lasted just under an hour, but it was enough to set the entire operation in motion. He drove out in a work van, the kind of ordinary trip a moving company makes dozens of times a year, but this was a dry run, not a delivery. Brian Wright took his truck across the channel to the Netherlands and treated the route as a full-scale rehearsal for a much larger operation. The purpose was strictly analytical, to identify any practical choke points. On the way back, he took careful notes on his phone, making references to border checks, timings at ferry and port checkpoints, where security was lax, and where he encountered delays. National Crime Agency surveillance teams were already on him. Covert listening and tracking devices recorded his progress, and the trip was woven into a growing pattern of activity that investigators were piecing together. This wasn't just a one-time event. It lined up perfectly with other intelligence that showed contact between the men in Kent and the organized crime group in Merseyside. For investigators, the dry run confirmed their suspicions. These men were getting ready to use a legitimate transport business as a front for a high-value Class A import. Upon his return, he met with his 2 co-conspirators to go over everything he had learned. These debriefings weren't about bragging, they were operational, with every detail, feeding into a strategy that hinged on their ability to disappear in plain sight. A week after the test run, the plan went live. Brian Wright loaded up his truck once more, but this time it wasn't with furniture or moving supplies. It was filled with large glass fish tanks, meticulously sealed and stacked in the back. Officially, it was just another routine shipment from his Kent-based company to the Netherlands. But in reality, those tanks concealed a secret cargo valued in the millions. Tucked away inside the tank frames and sealant compartments, Dutch authorities would later discover 20.5 kilograms of heroin, 32 kilograms of cocaine, and 3 kilograms of MDMA, adding up to a combined weight of 55 kilograms with a potential street value of £4.5 million. Each layer of concealment was expertly designed to appear completely normal. The illicit substances were encased in adhesive linings, making them invisible to a quick glance, and could only be found once the tanks were taken apart. This complex operation had been planned for months, but by this point, the National Crime Agency had already sealed its fate. In collaboration with the Dutch National Police, the NCA provided comprehensive intelligence gathered from the earlier trial run, which included vehicle tracking data and Wright's probable route. As Wright made his way into the Netherlands, a surveillance team tracked him from a discreet distance, awaiting confirmation that the exchange was about to happen. But before he could complete the delivery, the trap was sprung. In the pre-dawn hours near Utrecht, Dutch officers converged on the parked truck, while Wright was asleep inside. He was taken into custody right then and there. As investigators began to search the vehicle, they carefully removed the fish tanks one by one, uncovering the hidden narcotics buried under layers of silicone sealant and plastic sheeting. Meanwhile, back in the UK, coordinated arrests were already underway. At their residences, Mark Ewell and Alfred Rumbold were apprehended by NCA officers. Subsequent searches of their homes turned up encrypted phones, handwritten notes, and stacks of cash, all evidence connected to the planned smuggling operation. The true scope of the network began to emerge. The recovered evidence included encrypted handsets, specifically EncroChat and Sky ECC devices. An analysis of these phones revealed message fragments, contact lists, and transaction records that linked the Kent-based trio to a much larger organized crime syndicate, one that was already on the radar of law enforcement agencies across Europe. During questioning, Brian Wright claimed he had no knowledge of the illegal substances. He maintained that he thought he was simply transporting furniture for a legitimate customer. Well and Rumbold, however, presented a different narrative, claiming they believed they were smuggling alcohol and tobacco, not Class A narcotics. But the digital evidence painted a very different picture. By using digital attribution, financial records, and surveillance footage, NCA investigators were able to establish coordination and criminal intent beyond any doubt. The encrypted communications, when cross-referenced with the cafe recordings and Wright's trial run, created a complete timeline of deliberate planning, sophisticated concealment, and large-scale trafficking. In court, the prosecution presented the case as a prime example of how EncroChat intelligence has revolutionized the fight against organized crime, unmasking not just the new generation of digital criminals, but also the old-school couriers, who thought their experience and established routines would keep them hidden from the law. The case concluded at Aylesbury Crown Court in November of 2021, after a grueling 7-week trial that meticulously examined every single detail of the conspiracy. Following weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury delivered unanimous guilty verdicts. All 3 men were convicted of conspiracy to import Class A drugs. After the conviction, Wright's Rolls-Royce, his company vehicles, and other business assets were seized under the Proceeds of Crime Act, guaranteeing that no one would financially benefit from their illegal activities. When sentences were handed down on November 19, 2021, the penalties matched the scale of the operation, as well as the experience of the men involved. Mark Ewell, who was 64 years old at the time, was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Alfred Rumbold, then 65, also received a 14-year sentence. Brian Wright, age 73, was jailed for 12 years. All told, the trio was sentenced to a combined 40 years behind bars. What are your thoughts on this case and the sentences? Drop your opinions in the comments section below. We're eager to hear your take, and if you found this deep dive informative, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode of Burning Crimes.